Can the breath be psychedelic? An examination of Soma breathing meditation on quantitative EEG and altered states by Jeff Tarrant, PhD, Neuromeditation Institute. This series of case studies was designed to determine if participating in specific Soma breathing techniques can result in significant altered states of consciousness. The results were measured by subjective questionnaires and quantitative EEG analyses, allowing us to compare the results to previously published research with traditional psychedelics. Methods. Subjects. All subjects were female, ranging in age from 23 to 48. 66 identified as white and 33% identified as Hispanic or Latino of Spanish origin. All subjects had experience with yoga, seated meditation, and breath work or pranayama, all having engaged in these practices at least 1 to 2 times per week or more. Intervention. Soma breathwork. Soma breathwork is a complete system of breathing techniques that combines ancient practices of pranayama with modern science. The primary breathing experiences in this system consist of alternating between several minutes of rhythmic, cyclic breathing with breath retention. The entire practice is guided with a music soundtrack that includes verbal guidance as well as rhythmic drum patterns to coordinate the breath. The rhythmic beating portion of the practice involves inhaling and exhaling in a timed ratio with no pause at the top or bottom of the breath. In addition, participants are encouraged to pull up from the perineum during inhalation and relax during exhalation. The breath retention portion of the practice involves exhalation, all of the air out of the lungs, and then holding the breath as long as possible. When it's necessary to take a breath, participants are instructed to take a quick, short sip of air, exhale completely, and then hold the breath again. This process is repeated twice, following by a deep inhalation and a breath retention with full lungs. In the current study, the participants were guided in a 23-minute practice, which included 2 rounds of the pattern described above. Procedure. Subjects were provided with a detailed explanation of the research process and the techniques involved in the Soma breath meditation. After questions and concerns were addressed, subjects completed demographic forms and the Brunel mood scale. They were then fitted with a 19-channel electrocap. Impedance levels were monitored and kept below 10 ohms or 10K ohms. Baseline EEG readings were obtained in an eyes closed, seated position using a Brain Master Discovery EEG system. Following the baseline data collection, subjects wore ear-covering headphones to listen to the guided breath practice. EEG was recorded continuously during the breath meditation. Immediately following the meditation, a post-meditation EEG was recorded, and the subject was asked to complete a second Brunel mood scale, as well as altered states of consciousness questionnaire. The primary concern of this study was to determine if Soma breathing experience resulted in the subjective experience of altered states of consciousness and if the brain demonstrated patterns similar to those observed during the use of traditional psychedelics, for example, psilocybin, LSD, DMT, etc. Or actually, don't say DMT, I'm sorry. I'm so used to saying that. As a pilot, we initially examined a single subject. After transforming the pre-Soma EEG into a reference database, the data was compared to the EEG data from the post-Soma EEG. These analyses provided z-scores of change for all band waves, example alpha, theta, beta, in 84 regions of interest. Based on previous research, any z-scores greater than 0.8 was considered significant. Taking a conservative approach, we only examined z-scores greater than 1.0 in this study. The 3D brain images displayed below, and I will scroll down shortly. The 3D brain images displayed below shows changes in the brain after the Soma breath meditation. Cooler colors, blues, indicate that the activity measured decrease activity, whereas brighter colors, yellow, orange, and red, indicate that the activity has increased. Dark blue shading indicates areas that decreased by at least 1.0 z-scores. Red and gray areas indicate areas that increased by at least 1.0 z-scores. Green areas did not change significantly. Here's subject 1, and here's the pictures they were just referring to. These images allow us to examine overall patterns when examined this way. We notice that the delta, theta, and alpha brainwaves all decreased significantly and globally. When we consider the faster brainwaves, beta and gamma, we notice a significant decrease in the activity in the right frontal regions, beta and high beta, while gamma did not show any significant changes. And you can see the pictures again. Overall, these preliminary results suggested that Soma breathwork practice has a significant quieting of overall EEG activity. To examine these findings in a bit more detail, we used a spatial analysis technique to examine brainwave patterns below the surface of the brain. Standardized low-resolution brain electromagnetic tomography allows us to extrapolate from the surface to deeper brain regions. And the specific regions of interest we examined include the default mode network. The default mode network is an important set of structures in the brain that work together to create our identity, how we see ourselves, and talk to ourselves about ourselves. This region has gained a lot of attention recently due to its functioning in relation to mental health. Specifically, the default mode network tends to be overactivated with mental health concerns and quiets during the therapeutic use of psychedelics and certain forms of meditation. Changes in the default mode network during the Soma meditation are displayed below. We specifically looked at delta and alpha activity in the default mode network, as decreases in these two EEG bands are most associated with mystical experiences and improvements in mental health in research and psychedelic medicines. Clearly, the initial subject demonstrated brain patterns consistent with a psychedelic experience, and the next task was to determine if this pattern was constant among participants and if their subjective experience contained elements of an altered state. We expanded the subject pool to 8 subjects. 2 subjects were eliminated from the analysis due to participant compliance and poor EEG readings. And the final data set consisted of 6 participants using the same research protocol described above. After averaging the brainwave activity of the 6 subjects, we compared pre-post Soma meditation data across all EEG bands, determining the overall percentage change observed. And here's a picture. This chart shows that nearly all brainwaves in both hemispheres, both left and right, averaging all of the S. Loretta voxels, whatever that means, I don't know, decreased significantly following the Soma meditation, in some cases decreasing by nearly 30%. It is important to note that the brainwaves have showed the greatest change were the alpha bands, particularly alpha 1 or 8 to 10 Hertz. As noted earlier in this report, our primary concern is with the default mode network, as this set of structures is critically important in altered states of consciousness, meditation, and mental health. When we specifically examine changes in the default mode network, we see similar patterns. All brain waves in both hemispheres decreased in the default mode network following the Soma meditation. Again, similar to the overall brain patterns observed, the strongest changes related to decreases in alpha, in some instances decreasing by nearly 30%. The hub of the default mode network is a brain structure called the posterior cingulate cortex, or PCC, because of its role in orchestrating complex cognitive processes related to the self. It has become the most examined brain structure in relation to psychedelics. When we apply the same pre-post comparison to the PPC, we again see familiar changes, including a significant or 30% decrease in the alpha-1 in the right hemisphere. Interestingly, we also see the increase of theta 4 to 8. I'm not sure if that's hertz. I don't know what the 4 to 8 means. We also see the increase of theta activity in the same region. This is a slow brain wave often associated with memory, creativity, and the subconscious. It is the brain wave that is most often activated during the hypnotic state and can be connected to the brain being in a receptive state. The possibility that Soma breathwork process shares similarities with psychedelics and hypnosis will be described in more detail in the discussion section of this report. Posterior cingulate. I guess that's how you say it. Because it was noted that many of the participants reported positive mood changes, and I can attest to this, I love Soma. Let me start over. Because it was noted that many of the participants reported positive mood changes occurring as a result of the Soma meditation, we also examined changes in the insula. This is the brain region involved in the experiencing of a variety of feeling states, including pain, love, craving, addiction, and pleasure. It has been suggested that the insula plays a central role in our present moment awareness. And there's a picture of insula. Clearly, there was not as much decreased activity in the insula as the other examined regions. It's not as much, you can see. Importantly, there was also an increase of gamma activity in the insula. Gamma is the fastest brain wave we tend to measure and is typically seen as reflecting brain activation, as gamma activity shows the strongest and most consistent relationship to glucose metabolism. Next, we want to explore the subjective experience of the subject, and as noted above, all subjects completed a pre-post Brunel mood scale. This allowed us to examine the changes in how Soma meditation changed feeling states. Now, the Brunel mood scale. Brunel mood scale consists of 32 mood descriptors that are categorized into 8 unipolar dimensions: anger, tension, depression, vigor, fatigue, confusion, happiness, and calmness. Using a response frame of how do you feel right now, subjects indicate the extent of their experience of the mood descriptors on a 5-point scale, 0 being not at all, 1 being a little, 2 being moderately, 3 being quite a bit, and 4 being extremely. The graph below shows the average changes reported by the 6 subjects. Anger was at 0%, tension reduced by 86%, depression reduced by 14%, vigor reduced by 19%, fatigue reduced by 60%, confusion reduced by 43%, happiness increased by 36%, and calmness increased by 75%. Subject responses indicated significant decreases in feelings of tension, fatigue, and confusion, and significant increases in happiness and calmness. It should be noted that the amount of change observed was influenced by a floor effect, anger, and a ceiling effect, happy. Essentially, if subjects tend to score very low or very high at baseline testing, there was not much room for them to change on the scale. When we examine Brunel mood changes by subject, there is some interesting variability in responses. Subject 3 showed a Subject 3 is the blue. Subject 4 is this color. Subject 5 is that color, subject 6 is that color, subject 7, and subject 8 is green. Subject 3 showed a 100% decrease on the depression scale, while the other subjects showed no change. When you examine the raw data, it is clear that subject 3 is the only subject that endorsed any feelings of depression before the intervention. After the intervention, those feelings were reported as non-existent, resulting in a 100% change. Subject 6 showed a dramatic increase in fatigue, while all other subjects showed a large decrease. Upon a discussion within the subject, it was clear that she was sleep deprived before going into the session. She became increasingly relaxed, which led her to feel tired. It is also interesting to observe that the dramatic changes for subject 5 on a happy and calmness scales. It is also interesting to observe the dramatic changes for subject 5 on the happy and calmness scales, which subject 5 is gray, and here we go. Let's do happy here, calmness here. The person reported feelings of bliss after the experience more so than other subjects, and these results point to the idea that there are perhaps some common and expected responses to the Soma meditation, as well as some important individual differences. The pattern can also be observed on subjects' responses to the Altered States of Consciousness questionnaire. Altered States of Consciousness Scale. The Altered States of Consciousness Scale, or the OAV, has been in use for nearly 30 years and applied in a broad range of settings to examine a person's experience during non-ordinary states. The scale contains 66 items organized into 11 scales, measuring experiences such as experience of unity, disembodiment, and disembodiment. The original scale utilized a visual analog scale for each item that measured 100 millimeters. This was replaced with the current study with a 0 to 10 Likert scale. The scale was only administered after the Soma meditation, or the scale was administered only after the Soma meditation, as it would not make sense to assess altered states without an intervention. The scales below show the subject's raw scores for each of the ASC scale. ASC is Altered States of Consciousness. The main purpose in... The main purpose in examining all subjects in this manner is to observe trends in an individual differences. Clearly, all subjects reported low levels on the impaired control and cognition, as well as on the anxiety scale, and certain scales showed that an almost uniform pattern of responses, such as experience of unity, spiritual experiences, and other scales showed a fair amount of variability, such as complex imagery and audio-visual To assess whether these scores were meaningfully related to a psychedelic experience, we compared these scores to data from previously published research with psilocybin mushrooms and MDMA. Total scores for each subject for each scale were transformed into a total percentage, 0 to 100, providing a means to compare data from previous studies with data from the current study. The results suggested that the Soma breathwork meditation shows many consistencies with other psychedelic medicines. In fact, 3 of the scores for Soma were higher than the comparison medicines, including experience of unity, spiritual experience, and changed meaning. Not surprisingly, Soma scored lower than psilocybin on elementary and complex imagery. It has also scored lower on bliss. Conclusions. The results from this study suggest that the Soma breathwork meditation can produce experiences similar to those of traditional psychedelics. The results of the ASC questionnaire demonstrate this quite clearly, showing the overall trend of all subjects to report experience of unity and spiritual experience at a higher level than previously published research with psilocybin and MDMA. Importantly, the brainwave changes that were observed in this study also mimic research with traditional psychedelics, namely a decrease of power across all EEG bands with an emphasis on decreased alpha in the posterior cingulate cortex. The PPC is a hub of the default mode network, which is largely responsible for creating our sense of self. One of the reasons that traditional psychedelics may be effective in treating a wide range of mental health concerns is their ability to disrupt the system. With the mental processes that create an identity are offline, it produces an opportunity for something new to happen, to reinterpret aspects of previous traumas or begin to program new potentials into the subconscious mind. In this way, the therapeutic mechanism of psychedelics may share something in common with hypnosis. Hypnosis is generally thought of to exert its effect by shifting normal waking consciousness into a state that is more receptive, a state that is not encumbered by rigid ideas around identity and possibility. While there may be a variety of brainwave patterns associated with a hypnotic state, one of the most common is an increase of theta activity. Interestingly, this was observed in the PCC. In fact, it was the only brainwave pattern in either hemisphere of the PCC to increase in response to the Soma meditation practice. In addition to the effects above, it also appears that the Soma meditation practice has a positive effect on mood states. Overall, subjects in this study reported a significant decrease of negative mood states such as tension and confusion, and a significant increase in positive mood states such as calmness and happy. Again, when we examined brain regions often involved in emotional processing, insula, we saw a pattern of increased gamma in this region, particularly in the right hemisphere. This is important because right insula activation often corresponds to the embodiment of a feeling state rather than just about an emotion they are feeling in the body. The overall results of this study were very positive and suggest that Soma breathwork may have the capacity to induce states similar to those observed with traditional psychedelics, as well as some possible hypnotic processes and mood-enhancing effects. This further suggests that this type of breathwork practice may have a therapeutic potential, particularly if used intentionally to process past traumas and or to embed new beliefs and behaviors into the subconscious mind. There was one result from this study that was a bit unexpected. While subjects reported experiencing an element of bliss, these scores were significantly lower than what had been reported with other psychedelics. One potential reason these scores were not as high in the sample is due to the fact that the subjects had never done this exercise before, and it was a shortened version of the typical 1-hour practice. Future studies should explore these patterns during a 1-hour Soma breathwork experience. In addition, it may be useful to specifically examine subjects who have more experience with this form of breathwork. Further, it may be valuable to examine individual subjects that have very strong responses to the practice to learn what it was that facilitated the experience for them. It is also recommended that mental health therapists trained in this process explore its use as a possible therapeutic technique to help clients move through the defenses or plateaus in their psychological work. And here's some contact information here, Jeff Tarrant, PhD, and here are some references, and I will put the URL in the show notes below.